Hi, Rod. Nice to meet you again.
Hi Fabian, nice to meet you again.
No, thank you so much for taking a few minutes for this today. Shall we start with a quick introduction from your end, if that's okay?
Yeah, sounds good. I'm Rohit Auluck. I work in the technology space now. By education, I did mechanical engineering at the University of Leeds. I did a master's in that, and then I went directly into industry effectively. So I worked for an industrial machinery company, and then I went straight into automotive. So I've had the joy of working for sort of a tier one supplier, a couple of OEMs. I'd say I've had like an unconventional career, if you like, but that sort of led me to my role today in technology. So effectively, what I do today is lead strategy for an industry, which is mobility and transportation. But then I also have like a horizontal focus on digital factory. All my experience sort of comes into use because I can effectively look across the entire product development cycle and see how to add value to a whole range of customers working within the mobility and transportation industry.
It's
And
fascinating.
and I'm based in the UK, as you can probably tell, just in the Midlands. Um, so yeah.
Very cool. I love the description of an unconventional career path, which very much resonates. To kick us off with a little bit of a broader question, how well would you say to someone who isn't working in the industry, automotive OEMs are currently doing as it relates to the implementation of AI across their value chain?
Yeah, so I'd say it's quite varied. Um, and you could split the OEM organizations by geographies effectively. So if you look at some of the more traditional OEMs, they're looking to use technology to see how they can reclaim their position in the industry in some cases. We see a lot in terms of with APAC and in China, especially, they have leveraged technology from the onset and they are progressing that. And as a result, they're able to get to market quickly, get vehicle propositions out the door fast across the value chain steps, and produce vehicles that are effectively in line with consumer requirements and aspirations around, connectivity, great UX design and UI. So the base of that is obviously having good data to leverage in order to be able to use generative AI in the relevant application steps across the value chain to bring that product to market.
What are some of these specific products or problems you've been working on over the past sort of 12 to 18 months, which seems to be sort of when Gen AI has become very prominent?
Yeah, for sure. I think when everything around like ChatGPT came out,
Mm.
some of us were sort of talking and we were like, actually, we've been doing this for quite a long time, but it's because of the exponential growth of ChatGPT, it's changed a lot of people's perspective on on leveraging that technology and implementing it within their organization. So from our side, effectively, when you look at how you can leverage the technology, you can effectively break it down into the different value chain steps that an organization would be going through. So, as an example, within the design stage, um, primary objective within the design stage is obviously to be as creative as possible. Make sure you can come up with vehicle propositions that are in line with constraints or not, depending on how exploratory the project or the program is. And then leveraging technology to get to market and get to sort of going for one and moving that design into engineering as quick as possible effectively. Now, what we are able to do is leverage generative AI to take some of the data and the design language of an organization to come up with, different design concepts that can then be refined further for the designer to take forward. So what we're not saying is that we're basically going to take this technology and replace a whole load of people. It's more so that we can use the technology to, well, augment, the processes that somebody's going through today. And what it enables is hopefully more creativity, faster time to market, because you shrunk that product development cycle down, and you've got a good set of data that you can take forward. And if you combine, the before and after steps of the product development lifecycle, if you've got input signals from strategy and planning teams around, what's the size of the vehicle, who's it for, what's the price point, these are all factors that you could potentially build into your generative AI for the design. And then you can leverage that downstream into the next phase effectively. So that sort of covers design. I don't know if you want to sort of have any questions around that.
Yeah, let's dive a little bit deeper into that before we move across the value chain. You mentioned a really interesting point around creativity, and I've heard statements from chief designers at some of the incumbent automotive OEMs, who said something along the lines of that Gen AI will never be able to replace the creativity that some of their designers are bringing into the different components in vehicle overall. And similarly, in some respects, in engineering, where it's sort of a very, very dynamic, highly complex space. And what I'm still trying to sort of get a sense of is what is the realistic opportunity here? There seems to be lots of sort of blue sky, huge possibilities. Then when we look into the current use cases that are being implemented, they're fairly small in comparison, really low-hanging fruit as far as I'm aware of. And do you have any perspectives on over the next, let's say, sort of 2 to 5 years? What do you think realistically is actually going to happen in terms of use cases in design and engineering that will provide some real benefit to the automotive organizations?
Yeah, so I think again it's sort of split. The the incumbents in the industry have got controversially a specific type of thinking, or they've been following processes for a number of years. So I think obviously there's a disruption in the industry, which might now mean that these organizations need to change. So as I mentioned, you can augment obviously the processes that people are using today with technology, but unless you fully embrace parts of it, you effectively might not get the full rewards of that technology. Um, I think personally, and this is my own perspective essentially, but over the next 2 to 5 years, I think it's more of a mind shift change that organizations need to take to sort of welcome the technology in to help you sort of evolve processes. And I think some of the organizations that have used the technology or are using it, again, aren't using it to replace people, but they're effectively helping designers and teams to understand what's the art of the possible effectively that a person might not have thought about because they were thinking in a different area or in a different way. So as an example, if you have a designer who is working to a specific set of constraints, they are obviously working where their mind's taking them, and you have to allow them that free time and that space to be creative. But what if you were able to provide them with some options up front when sometimes creativity is stifled, to get them started and use that as a base to then expand where you really want it to go. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
No, it's a really interesting point. Just from my sort of outside perspective, I haven't really done any work in the automotive design space. It how the LLMs work is, I guess, they're based on historic data,
Mm.
in large parts, and then what we might be able to use synthetic data, which enriches that in certain avenues, is still based on history. So how would be an LLM able to provide, I guess, new inspiration based on something that exists already?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think design is obviously a very emotional, you know, well, it's emotionally led, isn't it? So when you make decisions on purchasing, depending on who you are, design might be a major factor in that. Our OEMs do exactly the same, like they lead with design in some cases, and then everything follows suit from there. Um, what's really interesting is as we see new EVs coming to the market, especially from some of the larger organizations, what are we actually seeing? Well, what we're seeing is that they're looking back in terms of, you know, what did we have 30 years ago? What was a best-selling model then? What can we recreate? So now the opportunity to leverage all of that design language over the past 30, 40, 50, 100 years, and then come up with new, vehicle propositions is actually, really welcoming. And I think if you combine that with then the, where the industry is heading in terms of EVs, it gives you sort of a nice mix of different factors that enable you to sort of choose a design, move that forward, and push your organization forward essentially.
Super interesting. Let's move, if you've got perspectives on sort of the downstream stages of the value chain, what are some of the, I guess, possible use cases where you would see some, I guess, synergies? Just to contextualize this, what I've observed over the past, especially 2 years, is that lots of these use cases that provide quite significant upside sit end to end across at least two, in some cases, three, or maybe even four business functions. So it starts with design, engineering, industrial operations, commercial, and involves a really, I guess, streamlined approach in terms of how data is being used, what the process should look like, and also what the technology should do.
Mm.
Um, what are some of your observations on that in terms of downstream benefits, maybe stemming from some of the improvements in design and engineering?
Yeah, so I think I can give you an example of, I won't tell you the exact organization, but if you take sort of like a wheel design, for instance, and you combine sort of bill of design, bill of process, manufacturability into all of that, then effectively your generative AI can take all those inputs, and obviously come up with something that's more viable. It meets the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. When you compare that to, how something traditionally might flow, you might have, a designer who designs something, an engineer says it is or is not feasible, and then downstream from that, you see a manufacturing team potentially saying that, well, it's great, but we can't make it. So all of that effectively adds time into the process, and then that delays that whole product development life cycle, which then in turn, to the point that we made at the beginning, stops potentially an organization being profitable first to market. So across sort of design, engineering, and manufacturing is leveraging, the right inputs or the right input signals from different areas. So as said, if you know you've got a specific bill of design from engineering that needs to be followed, that can also be implemented into the input signal for the large language model. And then downstream from manufacturing, if there is a best practice or a preferred method, or even a constraint in manufacturing, because you only have certain types of machines, you might not have the investment to change things, then that might lead you down a path to say, well, you have to use a specific material or a technology in order to bring this product to life.
First of all, thanks for that. Where are some of these solutions coming from? Is this everyone is kind of working on it, especially on the OEM side? All of the different functions are experimenting a lot, having lots of conversations with different possible partners, but it feels a little bit messy at the time of this conversation.
Mm.
And at the same time, we've got loads of specialized startups that focus on very specific use cases, and then the sort of established tier ones, in some cases tier twos, trying to sort of positively push some of these innovations into the OEMs.
Mm.
How do you see this play out realistically in terms of some of these really important innovations? Do you think this is something that the OEMs might be able to internalize? Do you think that's something that
Mm.
where they will seek strategic partnerships, and what are some of the ins and outs associated with that?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and it's one that actually we talk about quite a lot. Because effectively, if you look at sort of what's the root and the base of some of the problem, it's going back to what we said, right? You've got traditional workflows and processes, and that's okay. That's not, I'm not saying that's bad. It is just what it is. Equally, you've got a skill set of people who might have also been aligned to those traditional processes and workflows, disciplines and capabilities required effectively. I think some of the more innovative OEMs, tier ones, are obviously looking across in terms of what are new skills required, what are new capabilities, how do we leverage the right talent from different areas of technology and bring them in-house. So there's that aspect of it, which I suppose is more of a strategic decision that an organization makes to balance the risk of outsourcing everything, um, with a bit of, making sure that we've got enough capability internally to critique what we might be working with someone on. The other one that we see quite a lot of is, OEMs partnering directly with a technology company within a specific area of the value chain. So you might get a major OEM who works really closely with a technology partner, and effectively they act on, supporting each other. So the OEM leverages the technology, and the technology then can understand the problems, the pain points and challenges of the OEM so they can better support the whole industry moving forwards. And then you've got the other side of it where you've got pure technology companies leveraging all of this tech that they have and thinking that, they can just go and potentially make a car or another product. So then they do it the other way around, whereby they leverage skills from industry, bring them in-house and get them to tell them exactly what does the industry need, and how can we help them, because we've got a whole lot of things that we're able to do, but we don't have access or the know-how or the knowledge to speak to some of these companies. So I'd say there's a blend of a lot of that happening. I think when you look in sort of in the market, you can often see like who might be leading in terms of transforming, if they are, diversifying or pivoting what their current offering is. And then you can see some of the other OEMs or tier ones who are sort of pivoting 100%. So, today they do ICE components and systems and assemblies, and then tomorrow, they're just like, well, no, we're just going 100% EV. But that is effectively a strategic decision of the organization, as to, what are they going to balance with risk and partnerships and so on effectively.
You mentioned the aspect of talent gaps there, capability, talent and capability gaps. What specifically are these gaps that you refer to in terms of the very specific roles or skill sets that are missing?
Within automotive organizations or just generally within the industry?
Let's start with the value chain generally as relates to the delivery of AI, Gen AI use cases, and then maybe zooming into your observations from some of the automotive OEMs specifically, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned previously, like across the value chain, obviously you have the traditional disciplines and capabilities of the workforce, because obviously that's what they've studied and that's what they've come in to do, and that's where they have experience around. What I've seen in the past year or so is, and I think it probably relates to your previous question as well, is that there's a partnering with a company who's sort of advising and bringing in new skills into a function effectively. So if you think about, a design studio today, they might have, 100 plus people, and they probably won't have anyone who's specifically focused around AI, but because they're working with like research and development teams, they are focused on working with a technology partner. Then they would then start to look at, well, what is the ramp up of either new skills into the department, or you could call it upskilling, but I'd probably call it more expansion of current capabilities within the design space to help, designers and creators in that area really. I think sometimes there's a domain expertise and knowledge that people have, right? So whether it's in design or engineering or I think some of the problem comes is knowing each other's, pain points, challenges, limitations today, limitations, in the future, which sometimes is a gap. And that gap can only get filled once, you've got commitment from the organization that this is something we want to do. We're going to invest some time, and whether they run it, in a program, or whether they take it offline and say, like, we're going to run a sandbox for us to explore, you know, generative AI in a specific area. Um, but I'd say that you can't really just have a single skill set and say that, well, we're just going to be really good at this, because effectively the world's moving too quick for anyone to just be stuck in one world or the other. And I think it's the combination of these two worlds coming together that is making some markets more successful than others, and is making new products come to market really quickly. And that's just not for AI. I think that's just generally across technology that we're seeing.
Building on that, what you mentioned that loads of these individuals working in design, engineering, and so on, they've got very specialized expertise. On the other side, we've got some of these new technologies that promise to do things better, cheaper, faster, to improve efficiency and effectiveness. And at the same time, we've so far, as far as I'm aware, across the industry, not really seen any, I guess, major plans to reduce the workforce in these areas. Some actually have explicitly said that there won't be any, I guess, redundancies or anything like that in their organizations due to the rise of AI, which puzzles me a little bit, sort of looking at this from the outside. If you do essentially the same thing, so it seems like some people might just be doing less in a way. I was just wondering, how do you see this play out? Will there be some sort of huge reskilling, or those might be quite tricky given the sort of wide gap in terms of capabilities? What do you think will happen with lots of these roles that might no longer be needed in the way they exist today?
Yeah, so I think again it's then dependent on the strategy of the organization. What I definitely can see from my own perspective is that it depends on the individuals working in the organization as to what is their appetite to learn new skills and expand effectively. So there's a couple of things that we often hear and talk about, which is there's a skills shortage in specific areas, but then there's also like an aging workforce. So if there's somebody coming to the end of their working life, or they're three-quarters of the way through, how receptive may that person be to learning, new skills or advanced capabilities that they, don't really have an interest in doing? I think for people to say that there won't be any redundancies is also um, quite interesting, because there might not be redundancies effectively saying that we don't need these people. But I'd say that it's more that, we've employed a whole lot of people, like 100 people in, so we've got rid of 100. So you've got almost like a flat, resourcing plan. I think successful organizations will use technology to augment current processes in some areas, and they will use the technology to potentially just replace where it seems like, because it's due to safety or it's quicker, or potentially there is a cost benefit or sustainability benefit. But then I definitely see the requirement that there'll be people to be making decisions, to lead, what's the strategy of an organization. Um, yeah. So I do think that there will be changes in the workforce. I think it's easier for people to say there won't be redundancies because they don't want to stifle the onset of technology. But we will see a change in the landscape over the next 3, 5, 10 years and beyond, effectively.
You emphasize the importance of data to deliver these solutions successfully throughout our conversation. What are some of the data-related challenges that you've seen amongst the clients you work with or in the industry more widely?
Yeah, so we get a mix really. So if you think about maturity of capabilities, um, well, let's take one as an example. Let's say we think about more downstream operations and manufacturing. A lot of people in the industry say that we want like a digital twin. Now, a digital twin's great if you know exactly what you want to use it for. If you want to go beyond visualization and you want to really understand what's going on in your operations, so you can obviously leverage that information to make better design decisions, make your product more efficient in terms of its manufacturing process. But the reality is that sometimes there's a number of steps to get to that point. And sometimes there's a bit of it's a bit of a shiny ball out there that let's go and do this thing, which is, digital twin or AI or whatever it might be. But there's a number of steps in between. So a lot of the time, we have conversations around, what are you trying to achieve as an organization? And it's like, well, we want to be, we want to have a digital twin. And it's like, that's fine. But what are you really trying to achieve? Like, what is your pain points? What are your challenges? What's driving you in market? What are those different pestle factors that are really impacting your organization that you think that you need a digital twin? And a lot of the time it comes back down to, if there's 5 steps in a maturity for a capability, sometimes they'll be at, 1, 2. Some organizations will be at 0. But it's that realization of understanding where you are today and where do you want to get to, then helps us to then help organizations really. Um, so yeah, in the case of a digital twin, just expanding on that, like if you haven't even got a drawing of your facility, which in my experience, I suppose it was 5 to 10 years ago, but you'd go and ask for like, where is the layout? And they're like, well, here it is, and it's like, well, this is from like 1990. It doesn't even tell me, which machines are where. I can't use this information. So then it's just progressing people through the different stages of the maturity cycle. And then you've got data, right? And then you can use data to then do more advanced things. So again, in keeping with that digital twin example, if you are seeing that there's inefficiencies or problem areas within, manufacturing, then effectively you can leverage that data to go back into the design phases of the factory for factory layout planning, run it into simulation, do what if scenario planning, look at what it might take in terms of 4D planning if you were to implement it. Then data becomes really powerful. But without that, I feel like, unless organizations can get that organized and can manage it well, then some of the capabilities that we're talking about today just will not live on.
Just on that point of maturity, you mentioned one specific example there in terms of um, outdated manufacturing site plants as an example. What are some of the other questions you go through or ask your clients to assess their maturity as it relates to the underlying data and data capability?
So we effectively just look across the whole process in terms of what are the tools, systems, processes that they're using today. What's working well, what's not working well. In many cases, you have, an organization will have 10, 50, 100 plus different applications and systems that they're using, many of which don't talk to one another. So it's trying to get them to understand, like, if we want to like leverage this data downstream, then we need to have data that can talk to one another. It's okay that you're using different applications. It's okay that even for ourselves as software provider, you don't often expect that somebody's going to be using a whole end-to-end portfolio from design through to manufacturing, because that's just not realistic in some cases within enterprise. So it's effectively laying out, what is their processes today, what have they got, where are they trying to move to, and then effectively how do you bridge that gap, all the while every 3 months, 6 months, yearly new technology comes on board. So then how do you incorporate that into your roadmap and what you're trying to do as an organization?
Very much sounds like sort of an ongoing process that needs to be reassessed every now and then.
Yeah, and that's often a discussion that we have. So it's never around, buy this and you're done. It's more around, so now you've obtained the capability, you've got maturity within it. How do you take it forward? How do you leverage it more? Um, if you looked at, capability analysis for a whole organization, they will have hundreds of different capabilities that, they need to manage. And then, ultimately, some of the value only comes when you connect capability A with capability B, with capability E, for example. And then that's when you get higher levels of maturity. And then that's where, you do get into conversations around, digital twin, because I've got my building data, I've got my equipment data, I've got my machine data, operations data, and it's all coming together that enables me to make decisions.
One final question from my side. Imagine that you're talking to the Chief Data and AI Officer at one of the incumbent automotive OEMs responsible for not just delivering strategic data and AI products, but also for the organization-wide data and AI strategy. What would be your top three recommendations to unlock the most possible value in a sustainable way from data and AI?
First of all, I would ask them around, what is their end goal in terms of, I mean, the end goal is never ending, right? But effectively, what within your time bound period, what are you trying to achieve? And as a data and AI organization, what are you trying to do there? Um, from that, then I try and understand, well, who is on board functionally within your organization and at what level in order to make this happen. Because I don't believe that there's a single group of people within an organization that can have such a monumental change within whether it's a traditional OEM or a tier one or even a medium size or small business. And then the next stage is around who is going to do the work, as in, what is your strategy to actually implement this? Is it, are we going to have a recruitment plan? Are we going to work with a partner solely? Are we going to have a blend of the two? And then how are we going to execute it year over year or whatever the time frame effectively ends up being?
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Rod, for your time and insights today. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you for having me, Fabian.